is busy. Things can get pretty intense from time to time. Our attention is captured by current events or brief moments that distract from what's important. As we walk this path, our focus starts to shift. Our gaze begins to wander. Life itself gets a bit blurry. That's what chaos does. It diverts our eyes from looking at Jesus. It steals our gaze and distorts our view. But this is not how God intended us to live. For He is the peace in the chaos, the calm in the storm, the anchor in the rising sea. When we keep our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, we can walk through anything this life has to offer.
Statements like that, they seem clear. They seem affirmative. They seem sure. But we live in what seems to be a confused world. You know, we hear all the arguments about uncertainty, and I'm not sure of this, and I'm not sure of that, and nothing seems certain anymore. That's the world we live in. That's reality. And again, that's not being negative or anything. It's just being honest, because that's where we are. We see people that are trapped seemingly in this place that they can't see outside of that circle of confusion. When we look at the word confusion means bewilderment. Okay? The word confusion means a state of chaos or disorder. There was a song back in the 80s, and the first part of the line of the chorus, it says, there's too many men, there's too many people making too many problems, and not enough love to go around. Can't you see this is the land of confusion? Very popular song back a long time ago on the radio and what have you. But the point of that is you can't see it when you're in it, because you're blinded to it. You can't see beyond that circle. So what we find as a result of things being in such a state, it's not just chaos, it's not just uncertainty, but it gives us and creates the inability to move forward. In other words, we get stuck in a place, and after we're there for a while, we can't see an answer. And the number one reason that we can't see an answer is we've stopped looking for it, because we've convinced ourselves that it doesn't exist. We've convinced ourselves that it can't possibly be there because things are so bad. Things are so chaotic. Things are so confused. How could it possibly get better? How could it possibly, even if the answer is standing right in front of me, I can't see it. That's where a lot of people struggle with things today, and in particular, I would say matters of faith, because we have such a barrage now of things being aimed at us from as a society of believe this, believe that, go here, go there, do this, do that, don't do that, and we have, it's a mess. It's an absolute mess. So how do we find clarity? How do we lift the clouds? How do we navigate, if you will, the darkness of confusion? Because it is. It is very confusing. And sometimes in the dark, if you've ever been in a place that is utterly dark, it kind of messes with your senses a little bit, right? You're not sure which way to turn, and so you're feeling the wall to see if the light switch is there or whatever. All these things are there. So confusion, how do we turn this around? How do we find an answer? Well, let's turn to a very familiar text, if you will. Let's, as I said earlier in the opening, let's take a walk down the road to Emmaus. What is happening there is very relatable to life today. Because when we get trapped into discouragement and disappointment and, man, I really thought I had it figured out, we get trapped in that place when the answers don't line up. And so what do? How do we get past that? We move to our opening text, verse 13 of chapter 24 of Luke. And it begins, it says, "Now, on that same day, two of them were on their way to a village called Emmaus, which was about 7 miles from Jerusalem." So there's several things in this breakdown. It begins now, that same day. Well, what day? It's the day of the resurrection. It was, as we could read earlier in prior parts of this chapter, that earlier in this time, in this morning, if you will, the tomb had been found empty. So on the surface, we would see reason to be jubilant, reason to be excited, reason to, wow, all this has come to be. But we find them doing what? Walking away. That's important because here they've heard about this. The tomb was found empty, and we read that the women who discovered these things, they were out telling everybody, and they were letting people know what they had witnessed. But it states here, if you look a little bit further up in verse 11, it says, "But these words seemed like nonsense to them, and they did not believe them." Okay, why? Well, let's look at how we get to where we are on this road to Emmaus. Let's see what's going on. Because to those that heard this, it says that it sounded like nonsense, that they did not believe them. So we find in this opening text here in verse 13 that two of them, so these are two people that had heard what had been said, right? And it says two of them on that same day, they were walking toward this village called Emmaus, which was 7 miles. Everybody ever walked 7 miles? It's a pretty good stretch. Okay, pretty good stretch of traveling there. In other words, well, again, what we find is they are walking away. They are not being drawn into what they've heard because we read they did not believe it and it was nonsense. How did they get to that place? Because this was the promise. This was the thing that was supposed to happen, right? This was everything that had been counted on. What had happened? They were going in another direction. Nothing made sense. This confusion crept in like a heavy fog. And if anybody ever been to San Francisco and seen the fogs come over the mountain? Unbelievable. And man, you can't see when that stuff settles. It's amazing. We were out there years ago, and I was like, whoa, that's unbelievable. Or if you ever been, in the mountains when the heavy fog settles down, when it really, and so when this stuff settles, the harder it is to see. And so what we must understand here is the emotion of the moment, because it absolutely factors in. The emotion of the moment. What had just happened? The crucifixion. It was brutal. It was awful. It was ugly. It was traumatic. It was devastating. Everything that they believed, this one that they believed, the one that they saw was the answer. Well, he's gone. In a very literal sense now, gone. Taken from them. And not just in a normal or peaceful manner. This was violent. This was horrifying. This was life-altering. This was important. And the impact was harsh. We have to understand what had happened. We have to understand how they're relating to this. The impact was harsh. And now they're trying to balance out the weight of all of that. And now they're being told frantically by these ones who have witnessed, he's back and everything's okay. Now, imagine receiving that on that moment when you have been devastated emotionally by the trauma of what you saw, regardless of the promise, and we'll talk about that. You don't always hear everything when you're dealing with this level of emotion. And so here they're being told, he's back. Everything's okay. Now, we know that Jesus said this, right? He said, this has got to be done. I got to be handed over, and 3 days later, I'll be back. Well, clearly, they either did not hear that part, which many times we don't. Sometimes when things are said right in front of us, we don't always hear it. It's not just selective hearing. Sometimes we just don't because we're overwhelmed by the drama of the moment, or they didn't realize he was serious. How many times have people said something and in the back of your mind, you may not audibly say it, but you're saying, you're right. You're not really going to do that. I know you mean well. You know, it's like when your teenager says they're going to clean their room. You know they're not. but seriously, that's what we find here. So confusion has set in. And they're walking, and we read that they were discussing as they're walking. They're discussing everything that took place. So we can imagine just for a moment, it was one of those conversations as these two are walking, and they are saying to themselves, man, whew, can you believe what these last couple of days have been? Can you? How did this happen? How did we get here? And can you believe Mary and all these? I mean, they're telling us that Jesus is back, and they're telling us that everything's okay. I mean, you can picture this conversation as they're walking down this road 7 miles, so they got a little time on their hand, okay, because that's going to take a little while. I mean, come on, really? That's the conversation that's happening. Can we get there? Absolutely. We can get there and get there really, really fast. We look at the confusion of the world today. How easy is it to have that road conversation? Man, can you believe the mess that's going on around us? Can you believe this? I mean, that's a very, very easy conversation to have. But so-and-so is telling me that it's going to be okay. Everybody's telling me, oh, it's great, and you just got to do this and believe this and that. It's not that easy, friends. It's not that easy if we just be honest. And it tells us here that it wasn't easy for them either because they saw what happened. We saw him get buried. We saw what he went through. How could anybody survive that? How could this possibly be? And then we read in this discussion in verse 15 that now not only are they discussing, we read that they are arguing. Oh, come on, man. You can't. Yeah, I mean, and now we got banter back and forth. We've been discussing everything, and I mean, it is without one of those doubts in that moment. Can you believe what's really going on? Can you understand what's really going on? We read here that they are arguing yeah, I know, but come on. I mean, I know what he told us. I heard him. I was standing there too. I know what he told us, but has a way to always find its way into the conversation. And it changes the conversation every single time because now we're not in unison anymore. We're not in agreement anymore. We're not in harmony anymore. You feel this way. I feel that way. And we're not meeting in the middle here at all. There's something going on. And so before long in these types of matters, clarity is gone. And confusion has set in. It's very similar to today in the variations of beliefs. Again, as I said, so many different things are thrown at everybody. And we see how this turns into division rather than unity. Why? Because everybody wants to be right. This group wants to be right. That group wants to be right. Everybody wants to be right. And in the midst of that, because I can't get my way, well, I'm going to hold my breath and pout and stomp my feet and, vote you out or whatever kind of nonsense may come about in this world today. And so we read that in the midst of this conversation, which is now devolved into an argument, we find that Jesus, it says himself, came near and began to walk along with them. I want you to consider that image, if you will, for just a moment. Not just two people at odds over a subject, but two people seeking answers to questions. Two people seeking answers to questions that they thought they had the answers to. How many times sometimes is that a struggle? I thought I had it figured out. I thought I had it right. But then there's question marks behind those things now. Then there's uncertainty behind those things now. And all has changed now within my inner being because they thought they knew. And everything now that they thought they knew had been turned upside down. That's a real place in life. Because we can be walking down all kinds of familiar roads. We can be walking down lifestyles. We can be walking around life term appointments of such things. And one day, all of a sudden, it's not the same. One day, all of a sudden, it's been turned completely upside down, whether by self-inflicted wound or by opinions of others. But regardless, it's there. How do you deal with that? You discuss it and argue it. That's what these two guys were doing, all right? That's the reality of how this was moving. But we read that Jesus was there. It's an easy place to get to, friends, because the quick place to go to in these type of conversations, this type of thought process is, well, they just didn't listen. Jesus told them. So their arguing is silly and their argument is discounted because he already told them. They just didn't have enough faith. They just didn't believe enough. They didn't read their Bible enough. I mean, all the other things that we'll hear. But when it gets serious, when it gets personal, when we look at it from the reality of life, we see how easy confusion could step in. I didn't hear it, and it wasn't because I wasn't listening. It didn't resonate with me in that moment. It didn't enter into the confines of my mind at that moment because I was somewhere else. I mean, think about this for a minute. They witnessed maybe one of the most brutal things they'd ever seen in their life. I mean, and at that moment, in that time in history, the crucifixion in and of itself, that was the most brutal form of human torture at that moment that existed. You know, obviously we've unfortunately evolved to worse as time has gone by with different things now. But at that moment, not only the trauma of that, but it is someone that you know and love and trust and you thought was the answer. They believed this. We talk about belief and faith and trust. They did. They had all of that. And they placed it in this one person and everything that they said, everything that they did. They took literal to follow me. And now all of a sudden, that's over. That's exactly how they felt. You know, that's exactly how they felt. And so while it's easy to ridicule, it's easy to subject and say, oh, well, they just didn't listen and they... Well, no, put yourself there. Think about that for a minute. Think about it. I can think about it, and I try not to, but some of the horrifying things that I saw on the road, you know, dismemberments and all kinds of stuff. You can't forget that stuff. It changes how you are. It changes what you see. And so we begin to feel and look at this entirely differently when we see it through our own eyes, when we begin to see the literacy of this soul. While Jesus, we read, is right there with them. Why? Because he promised to never leave or forsake. He was right there, even in the midst of their brokenness, even in the midst of their doubt and their concern. He was right there. He promised to never leave nor forsake. Yet, they say in this passage, were prevented from recognizing him. It's a very important word there, prevented, because the initial thought when we hear that word is, well, what? What got in the way? What prevented them from seeing him? But it's not what, it's who. And it was themselves. Sometimes we get in our own way. You ever done that? We all get in our own way, right? But here I am so overwrought with me. I am so overwhelmed with my inability to process this situation. You may be offering me the answer and the solution, but I can't see it. Because there's a veil over my eyes right now that I put there. And then until I'm ready to lift it, until I'm ready to get it out of the way, you can't help me. It's much like dealing with an addict. Until they understand they got a problem, you can't fix it. Joe Walsh, anybody know that name? Who knows that name? I know Sam knows that name. Charlie knows that name. Joe Walsh has been the lead guitar player for the Eagles for 50 years, right? Joe Walsh was a serious alcoholic. I mean, he took it like as a profession. He'll tell you that now. But in his testimony now, he shares, he said, you know, I had a problem with alcohol for 40 years. I just didn't know it. Everybody else did. It's a powerful story to hear him talk about how he's changed his life now. And when we think about that, it's the same thing. I put it there. I did it. and I can't see past it until I lift it up. So we read that Jesus is there, but they're prevented from seeing him, but it's actually not what, it's who got in the way. They did. We've all heard, all of us have all heard the sayings over the years, and I won't give them all, but the one that jumps to mind in this situation is, you can't see the forest for the trees. That sounds kind of dumb. But when you realize what it means, it's like, oh yeah, that's actually true. In other words, my issues, my issues, my struggle, and my refusal to look beyond it will not allow me to see the answer. And again, that's not beating ourselves up. That's just dealing with reality, because that's how it comes. That's how it works. That's how it places itself. And when we can't see the answer, that in many cases is right in front of us, well, it takes a while to get there. It's not an overnight thing. You know, and while those around want to instantly solve the issue, or they want to fix this, or they want to proclaim that, it ain't going to happen, okay, right in that moment. So we find Jesus just walking with them 7 miles. I love that, because he's showing us something, and this is what's so important. The literal case here on this road to Emmaus is what we're seeing. We're seeing two people that are lost in themselves, in the moment, in the tragedy, in the hysteria, in the all this, and despite what's been told and promised and all this stuff, they can't hear it, they can't see it. And so Jesus asked them, and he said, what is this dispute that you're having with each other? What's going on? Not that he didn't know, but they needed to voice this. They needed to get this out. We know sometimes what's going on in people's lives for various reasons, but they need to get it out. They need to deal with it on their own terms and everything. So he asked them, what's going on? In other words, what are you fighting about? Because they're not just discussing now, they're arguing. Okay, that's important to understand how those two things have been married together. So basically saying, do you even know? Do you even know? How many times have you seen people arguing over something? They have no reason, they have no idea what it was for. It started over something 40 years ago, and they're still arguing about it, and then forgot why, but they're still mad about it, you know? And I'll give you an illustration on that in just a minute. But we see here, he's asking them, do you know why? Do you know what has caused this argument that you're having? Because the concept alone is found at the core of most divisions today. Why are you at odds? Most people don't know. Okay? Why are you here? I don't know. So-and-so said it'd be a good place to come. Or why do you do this? A lot of times it gets lost over the longevity of time, or it really wasn't an important issue to start with, and we let the old mountain go to the molehill. Okay? It happens, all right? So when we think about that, the solid answer, the search that we have for the solid answer to the question why, that's a long search. How many times have we ever asked why and you still don't know? Okay, we all wrestle with that. Of course, I make no secret, and I've always showed the affection that I have had over the years for the Andy Griffith Show. Love it because there's such great moral stories within the confines of silliness of Barney and whatever. One of my very favorite episodes of the Andy Griffith Show is the Wakefields and the Carters. All right, and I love that episode because, of course, it's a takeoff in a comedic fashion of the Hatfields and McCoys, obviously without the bloodshed. But what we see here, so the Wakefields and the Carters are feuding and have been for all these years. All right, but the moral of this story and how it plays out is just so great, because here these two families are feuding, they're mad at each other, have been for a long time, and the situation now has risen because a young man from one family is in love with a young girl from the other family. And it's a mess, and it's a problem because everybody's mad at each other, and because of this long-standing feud, that just can't be. Well, eventually, Andy, of course, gets involved, and he has to go and try to communicate with each side of this. So he goes to the front porch of the one guy, and he says, do you know why you are fighting? And the guy says, because they's Carters. He says, is that it? He said, yeah. He said, my grandpa was feuding with him, and his grandpa. And so then he goes to the other guy. He says, do you know why you're fighting? He said, because they's Wakefields. Well, Andy finally helped place a little bit of common sense within this whole thing and a little bit of humility and a little bit of love. And ultimately they realized they were fighting over nothing the whole entire time. And it was only causing confusion, which ultimately was not helping anybody and was hurting this young couple and on so and on so. And so here we find Jesus asking these two, what are you arguing about? What's going on between you? Because obviously you have a common thing that you share, but you don't agree. What is going on? How can we get to the bottom of this? We read that when he asked them this, they stopped walking. So he had their attention. They stopped walking, which means they were not moving forward anymore. And it tells us they looked discouraged. Think about that, okay? That's in verse 17. It says they stopped walking and looked discouraged. Was this because they didn't know the answer to the question? Or did they realize that what they thought they knew no longer looks like the answer? Because that in and of itself stops us from walking, okay? That's a story that's very personal to me, because sometimes when we've carried something for a long time within our makeup, within our character, with who we are, what we believe, how we operate, whatever, when you've carried it for a very, very long time and then you realize, wait a minute, that's not the answer anymore. Or that's not working for me anymore. That's a hard reality to come to. It's a very, very difficult place to come to because it challenges us deep inside. And so here, that problem I may share with you today is still very, very real. All right, so here again are two out of multitudes, but two who had witnessed, had understood, had seen everything that had happened, and it changed the course of their life because I counted on that to be everything. I counted on that to be the answer. He was going to be the one that was going to redeem Israel. He was going to fix everything. It's over. That's unimaginable to carry that kind of weight of something like that. And so they responded with a question. All right, so it was a diversion tactic, right? Okay, because if you ask me something I don't want to answer, I'll ask you a question so we can get it off of me. All right, we all do that. All right, that's counseling 101, right? That's how it works. We try to get it off of us. And so they respond to him. They said, "Are you the only one that don't know? I mean, do you really not know?" This, again, was an attempt to divert an internal confusion and place it on somebody else. That's what we do. And they did it. And they were trying to maybe even find an answer through another route. Here's somebody else's take, because maybe if you tell me what you're thinking, maybe it'll help me. All right, that's what's going on here. It's very, very clear. And so all the while, they were never addressing what they struggled with. They didn't answer that question. They did not do it. They got it off of them. And they said, "Have you not heard all of the things that have been going on? Do you not know what has happened in these days? What things have happened?" And Jesus answers in verse 19. He says, "What things?" So now he's trying to draw out the specifics for them. What is going on? What are you wrestling with? We need to get to the bottom of this. What has you so confused? Well, clearly Jesus knew, but he was giving them the opportunity. He was giving them the opportunity to vent, to let it all out, to talk about it, because what had them so confused was not, it was just boiling in there. It wasn't being able to come out. It was just making a mess. It's like having a lid on the pot and you see the bubbles flying up and the steam, but it can't get out until you lift the pot, until you lift the lid off the pot, right, to let it out of there. And so when you do that, what we're finding is him allowing them to do this. And I want to say this with absolute sincerity. What he was telling to all of us today, it's okay to have questions. And I want us to know that today. There are a lot of people that will not tell you that. A lot of people that will refute that and say, absolutely not. You've got to ask questions. The deeper you get, the more you better ask questions, okay? I mean, it's like trying to dive too deep in the ocean. You better ask, how much further can I go? Ask questions, right? This is what Jesus is telling us in this conversation, because you have two that are at odds over a connected issue, because this is something that we need to learn. This is something we're not in harmony about here. What is going on? What has happened? And so they're walking and they're talking and they're trying to figure it out. Jesus is walking with them and he's letting them do it. And it's okay if you ask questions. It's okay if you don't understand. He's letting them know it's okay. So they said, so what does that mean? It worked. He got it out of them. That was it. He said, so he said, well, what things? So they said, now we're getting somewhere. Now we can get to an answer. Now we can find some clarity. And he's letting them know it's okay. Now we can focus on the issue rather than the circular questions of what and how and why and on. Because those don't resolve confusion. We can get to all of those different things in the course of it, but that doesn't resolve anything. Jesus was helping point them toward the answer, even if they didn't see it right that minute. He was helping them get there. You know, that one left turn that you didn't see on the map, that's the one that gets you on the street. And you're like, why am I going down this road? And then all of a sudden, oh, there's the place right there. That's how it works. This is what he's trying to get them to see. And so the things concerning Jesus of Nazareth, they said, what was he talking about? Crucifixion, resurrection, trial, all these different things. And so they were letting it all out. The things concerning him. What was concerning him? All the things that had just happened, the things that have bothered me, the things that have traumatized me, and on so and on so. But here's where it gets interesting, right? So they say, the things concerning Jesus of Nazareth, who was. That's important because they're speaking in past tense now, right? What are they saying? That this is a key tone change in the conversation. You know, when we're talking to someone, we can hear the highs, we can hear the lows. All right, we can hear the in-betweens, we can hear the I don't cares, and we can hear the I'm excited. So keys in tone change is very important, not just in music, but in conversation. Because you can hear the deflection in someone's voice or the the inflection, all this other stuff. You can hear all these different things. Well, here it says, who was. So this speaks not just of past tense, but it speaks of finality. In other words, we thought he was, but clearly we got it wrong. We got it wrong. Think about that for a minute. Something that you've based everything on. Your life, your eternity, your salvation, your freedom, your liberty from your land that you live in being said, oh, that's all gone. I was wrong. Think about the devastation of that for a minute. Think about what was going on there for a minute. Clearly, we got it wrong and we don't understand. We don't understand. I mean, we are confused. Look at what happened. Look at verse 20. It says, and how our chief priest, again, ones that we leaned on for counsel, our leaders, they handed him over to be sentenced to death. So think about the outpouring of the emotion from this heart that is going on. And they crucified him. That's it. You don't come back from that. It's over. That's what they were saying here. And then verse 21 says, but. So again, this is the emotion of what has happened. But think about what is being said here. We were hoping. We thought this was it. We thought this was the one. We were hoping that he was about to redeem Israel. We were there. We were almost there. It was going to happen. And they took him out. My whole life has been rerouted. Everything has been changed. This is not a voice of surety. This is not a position of clarity, but rather, I'm confused. What happened? How did I get this wrong? You ever wrestled with that? If you haven't, you will. That's reality. Because sometimes we lean on something, and again, it could be an individual, it could be a cause, it could be a belief, it could be a whatever, doesn't matter. I just knew this was it. And somehow I got let down. That might not really be that, but that's how I feel in that moment. Somehow I was wrong. Somehow this is not working the way that I thought it was going to happen. How did I get here? This is where we find the heart of these that are speaking. And then they go on. And I said, besides all this, if that wasn't enough, it's the third day since these things have happened. So that's pouring more into, it's really over. It's done. What am I supposed to do now? And then they say in the next verse, verse 22, moreover, so even more than that, if you want to keep pouring salt in the wound, if you want to keep adding fuel to the fire, moreover than that, some women from our group astounded us. They came with a message that didn't make an ounce of sense, and they blew us away, because it says they arrived early at the tomb, and when they didn't find his body, they came and reported they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as they had said, but they didn't see him. So they were told he was alive, but we went there and looked. I didn't see him. He wasn't there. I didn't see it at all. What are they saying here? Besides all of this stuff, regardless of what has happened, it's the third day since it's happened. It's too late. I mean, confusion oftentimes moves us toward giving up. Why? Because I can't figure it out. I can't figure it out. And I'm the smartest guy I know. I mean, that's how we feel, right? and when we think about that, well, I can't figure it out. Certainly nobody else can. Why would I ask anybody? Because it's done. It's over. The Titanic has sunk. It's finished. And so why keep on? That's where confusion puts us. And sometimes it locks us in there with chains and shackles and leather tethers and everything else. And so it moves us that way. In other words, what's the use? It's too late now. There's no hope. How many people are stuck in that place today? I mean, we've talked about it. The suicide rate today is massive. I mean, it is off the charts. And I don't say that in any way to speak ill of anyone that is struggling with those things. It's real. Why? Because people are trapped in this place. They think, I had an answer, but it didn't work out. I mean, what am I supposed to do? And so here we find the word again, moreover, which is to say, again, if that wasn't enough, check this out. Think about what's going on here. Our friends, the ones that we trust, the ones that we run with, well, they say they went to the grave and, grave. The place where he was buried, which means he was dead, right? They went there and they said he was gone. The body wasn't there. Although he told them that that's what was going to happen, they didn't hear that part. And we went and we didn't see him. So what voice are we hearing in this? Do we hear confusion? Yes. We hear one saying, I don't understand. But also in the process, what we're also hearing is they've blinded themselves to understanding. I can't figure it out, so I'm not going to look anymore. That was me in algebra. but seriously, I haven't figured out the heck with this. We're talking about something that was life impacting. This was everything I believed in. I mean, I was counting on the whole shebang, to free Israel, to salvation, to the eternity, the whole gimmick. And it's over. What am I supposed to do now? This was where they were at. This is ultimately creating an unwillingness to even look anymore. How does that equate to the beginning of this? They're walking away. And not just around the corner, 7 miles away. They're distancing themselves from this whole thing. I don't want nothing to do with it. I'm out. It's an easy place to get. It's a very, very easy place to get. But here Jesus has heard their issue. He's heard their heart. He's listened to their confusion, their doubt, their questions, and all of it, again, is very normal based on the event. So there's nothing strange here going on. But he stayed with their issue. He stayed with them the whole entire time. It tells us he's walking with them. But then he turns to them in verse 25. And okay, so this is the teacher stepping out now. All right, so I've let you say what you need to say. We got it all out. That's a good thing. But how foolish and how slow. Now, this is not a rebuke. This is a thinking thing. Wait a minute. Think about everything that you've heard. Think about everything that you've learned. How foolish and slow are you to believe, meaning that you did, to believe all that the prophets have spoken. So all this teaching that has come about, everything that states all the way back, as it says, he would go far as back as Moses, everything that you've heard, everything that you've gathered together, everything that you've held on, everything. He's saying, stop here for a minute. Think for a minute all that you've learned, all that you've taught, all that you've seen, everything that you've told others, everything that you believed. How did that affect you? What did you learn in that? How did that affect you? What did you learn? But here's the real test. What did you believe? You see, we can learn a lot of stuff in this life, friends. We can be taught all kinds of things, but what do you believe? Okay? I can learn how to fly a plane. You can learn, you can teach that, but do I believe it'll work? Not till you get in it and turn it on and take off, you know? That's how it all comes together. What do you believe? Belief is putting it in practice, okay? Belief is actually holding on to what I've learned. See, because knowledge is only the beginning of wisdom. The wisdom is the application of the knowledge. That's kind of how it all comes together. So here you're saying, think about everything that you've been taught. Think about everything that you've held on to, everything that got you to this place of belief. Well, what of it did you believe? Did you put any faith in it at all? What, did it have any credence? Did it have any merit at all? He says, wasn't it necessary? Wasn't it necessary for all the things that happened? Think about it for just a minute. You were taught that this was going to happen. I must be given over. I must be killed. All this stuff is there. And so now he's teaching. He's teaching. He's let them have their moment. They've shared everything that was in their heart and all the grief and all the woe and everything. Now he's teaching and he's looking at them and he's pointing them toward the internal, because that's where the answer is. The answer is in here. And he's saying, remember, look inside, search your heart. Then it begins to tell us that he started with Moses. And he says, think over all this stuff. Remember when it was clear. Remember before the confusion got set in. Friends, let me tell you something. The opportunity today for confusion is immense. Immense. Okay? We applaud the abilities and the accessibilities of social media and what have you to get out the message. Okay? We do, because we have opportunities to reach hundreds, maybe thousands of people that otherwise we'd never meet. But also in the same vein, we must be mindful that everybody, and I've said this before, and I don't mean to be crude, but every idiot with a phone, is now a teacher, and so you've got a billion different things coming at you to confuse you. What's true? What's not true? This guy says this. Well, this guy said that. Jesus has searched your heart. What do you believe? What do you remember? It is so easy to lose your way. And I don't say that just in some moral failure or stub your toe type way, but it is a fight inside our mind. That is where the war wages all the time, inside our mind, because it's the uncertainty. It is the uncertainty of what we've always heard or we felt like was true or right. And now we've got questions about it. Am I wrong? Am I right? Is this wrong? Is this right? Who said? And it's a gigantic message. He says, stop. And it says, as they did. They're having this conversation. Just stop. Think about everything that you've heard. Think about everything that you've learned, everything that you've been taught, everything that you have taught. What did it mean to you? Did it change your life at all? That's where we start. Because here, we see him walking beside these two. And he's allowing them to just share their thoughts and be truly transparent. Hey, I don't get it. That was okay. That was okay for him to let them do that. And it was okay for them to do that. I don't get it. I thought this. And I feel like this. And I believed this. And now I think I was wrong. Because it's not making any sense. None of this is adding up. What we find here is he does not jump all over them. He doesn't jump all over them. No, he meets them in it. Okay? We can easily do that today. Well, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. That's not what he says. He met them in because that was real. That's where they were. That's where they were. You can't clean something up until you deal with what got it dirty. Okay? That's how it works. And so here he met them in that. He allowed them to see that while confusion confuses, clarity is possible. It can come. We can find it. They came, it tells us, near the village where they were going. That means they walked for 7 miles. That was a long conversation. A long conversation. But sometimes when we're in the midst of a right place, sometimes you could walk 7 miles and not realize you've done it. That's how beautiful this type of conversing really, really is. So it tells us they got there. And again, that's a long time talking, a long time taking place. And we read, it appeared, it looked like, if you will, that he was just going to keep going. He was going to keep going. But they asked him to stay. What does this point us to? This points us to invitation. Not just to remain, but to reside. Will you stay with us? Something that you've said is, man, it's really got me thinking. Something that you've said are pointing me in a whole different place. And because this is not just familiar, but this is comforting. This is relational. This is, I want you here. That's all Jesus asked. That's all he asked. You want me there. That's about the relationship. Does relationships work if you don't want the other person there? No. No. Whether it's getting along, whether it's whatever. It could be every level from friendship to romantic and everything. If you don't want that other party there, that's not a good scene. Because it's tense, it's confusing, it's not comfortable. This, what they're saying to him is, we want you to stay. That's relational. That's, I want you here. Scripture tells us in many different places, and I just wrote down a couple of references. Knock and the door will be open. Seek and you'll find. Knock and the door will be open, and I will come in and dine with you. All these references are all over Scriptures, all over telling us his desire is, I want to be where you are, if you have me. You know, if you've ever seen the artist rendition of that scripture from Revelation where it says knock, and I will, knock. I knock on the door. I stand here and knock on the door, and if you'll answer the door, I'll come in. If you've ever seen the artist rendition of that, Jesus is standing at the door knocking. There's no doorknob on that door. Go look at it. There's no doorknob. You got to let him in. That's all he's asking. Because if you let me in, you want me there. You know? If you let me, they tell a funny joke about a Jehovah's Witness the other day. They say he's knocking on the door, and the guy finally answers the door and says, can I help you? He says, well, yeah, I want to tell you about this now. He says, well, come on in. And the guy sat down. He said, what do you got to say? He said, I don't know. I never got this far. But seriously, Jesus is saying, I just want to come in and sit down with you. I just want to have a conversation with you. I just want to try to help you clear up your confusion. So we read that he stayed, and it says he reclined at the table, which again, this is another thing that we've seen many, many times. Jesus reclining at the table. What is he talking about here? This points to not just being relaxed, but he feels welcomed. Does Jesus feel welcomed in your life? I mean, that's a big question, friends, because relationship goes both ways, as we just talked about. It tells us he took the bread and he broke it, and who did that before with them? There's only been one. They knew something was going on, and we see, of course, that was one of those, hey, wait a minute. It says their eyes opened at that moment. Their confusion did not simply go away because they finally got it. No, their confusion went away because they encountered Jesus. In other words, it got personal. See, when anything affects us personally, it changes things. Oh, that worked for you, not for me. We've all been down that road, every one of us. This is what he's trying to get us. Work it out. You invite me. You understand. He met them where they were, and he allowed them the room to breathe. He allowed them the room to think, to vent, to ask questions, and be honest. It's okay. I don't get it. I'm mad. It's all there. It's okay. He was there, and it tells us just like that, he was gone again. Friends, it's not physical constant presence that we're seeking here. This is not what we need, but rather the lasting lesson that is learned while we were there. It's the encounter. That's what we take away. Remember something that maybe you did a long time ago, or maybe it was a week ago. It was amazing, and the memory of it will never leave you. You couldn't stay there. Maybe it was a trip you went on, or maybe it was somebody that you met. You couldn't stay in that moment there forever, but you'll never forget it. You know, and it could be something really, really fun. It could be something horrifying. You know, I remember as a 6-year-old kid on the top of a roller coaster in Carowinds. I'll never forget that because it scared me today at 57. So it's still there. It scares you to death. But here what we find is those moments, they never leave us. And it tells us And at that very hour, in other words, now we get it, they got up and returned to Jerusalem. So they walked back another 7 miles, all right? Whatever time span it is. The confusion had them bound at one time. Many of us struggle with that today. Maybe someone that we know has there. They lost sight of not just their mission, but they lost sight of the truth. And that's what happens to us sometimes when we do that. And we read that as they went back, they found the other 11, and they began to tell them what happened and how he was made known to them. Confusion confuses. It really does, friends. And when it does, nothing's clear. Nothing is meaningful. Nothing is mindful at that moment. It is a real battle for so many, maybe in this very room, and certainly many that we know. Jesus met them in their storm as we're wrapping this up. In other words, and this is important. Think about this for a minute. He met them in their storm. He didn't heal their issue. He didn't condemn them. He led them to clarity. You got to fix you. That's important. There's people that I know in my life that I wish here were right now. And I don't say that because I'm anything great. I wish they were here right now to hear that. That they could understand, it's me. That's not arrogance. I've got to be the catalyst in this. Jesus pointed them there, and they saw it for themselves. This is still so necessary right now, friends. Then and now. What we find, it's not always confusion that's the actual problem. It's really not. It's not always confusion that's the actual problem, but rather the rejection of truth that creates the issue. They knew. But I can't accept that because it's not the way that I've got it envisioned. I can't accept that because that's not the way that I had it figured out. We're not always right. And that's a struggle in pride and humanity. That's just where we are. And so we see all of this all the time in all kinds of walks of life, and it remains a problem until we get confronted with reality. Oh, that really don't work. Yeah. So imagine today that you are traveling your road to Emmaus. I want you to picture that today. Maybe you got questions. Maybe you have confusion building up because what you knew, or at least what you trusted to be true and to be certain, well, maybe now it's not as certain as you had hoped it would be. I want you to remember this. You're not walking alone. You're not walking alone. He will not fuss at you. He will not fuss at you for asking those questions. Instead, he'll lovingly point you to the answer. So receive that today. Receive that. And then things will become clear. Receive that. And he will show you that today. On the road to Emmaus, they met Jesus. It changed everything. So here's the question. Will you keep walking? Or will you sit down? As I come and share this final song with you, this is more of a reflection song. So I would just encourage you, you can stand up if you want to, but I would encourage you to sit and think about this for just a moment as we wrap our time up together. And again, I love to be illustrative when I'm teaching, and we think about these that are walking and talking with Jesus and not even realizing what the answer is, standing right there before them. And when they finally had their eyes open, it changed their perspective of everything. I went back and they started telling everybody and all this other stuff. The answers sometimes seem to be obvious. They should be right there, and sometimes we can't see them because of ourselves. That's real. And if that's you today, because that's certainly me, I'm being totally transparent. I wrestle with this all the time because circumstances in life and whatever, and sometimes, oh man, I should know this. And you do, but you can't see it. That's okay. Let that be okay today. Don't beat yourself up over that. Just let him give you some clarity. Let him show you something and it'll change your life. So let this song just minister to you as we wrap up our time together.